Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining iShade today for our webinar and Ask the Expert session, The Importance of Building Client Relationships, presented by Peter Vessenes. With over 30 years experience in the financial industry, Peter is the CEO and founder of Profit-C Incorporated, a financial software service for financial professionals, CPAs, and pro advisors. Profit-C is an all-in-one financial analysis and budgeting software from seasoned financial experts. Profit-C helps business owners and financial advisors alike gain powerful insights to manage cash flow, grow profitability, and increase valuation. Immediately following today's webinar, I welcome you to join us for our online Ask the Expert session, where you can ask Peter all of your questions. Peter, thank you for joining us today. This is where I'll turn it on over to you.
Thanks so much. It's nice to be back with everyone. I have been gone for a bit since we last, those of you who come regularly onto my presentations, I've been in Australia and the United Kingdom since then. But one of the things that has been striking me, based on what's going on globally and essentially what's happening here in the States, is how critical it's becoming to building relationships with clients. And so I'll be throwing in tidbits along the way of stuff I've discovered that's going on, basically from legislature internationally, as well as things that I know will affect the markets here. But I really want to talk today about the importance of building relationships with clients. You know, we are in a communication era. The number of people that are involved in some sort of social or professional connection is just astonishing. The mobile access is, or Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, all kinds of other ways that people connect. I'm finding repeatedly that I'm constantly getting people asking to connect with me on one of the social media. And it's because of a relationship to a relationship to a relationship. And that's certainly what's happening to your clients. In particular, mobile access and the ability to ask anything on a Google world, there's a yin and a yang to that. There's a yin in that hopefully your clients can ask more intelligent questions, but frequently they're researching things that they certainly don't have your expertise on. And how do you manage your way through that? So one of the things that this causes is kind of instant gratification. I know, you know, because we do estate and trust and contract negotiations and investment strategies for physicians and surgeons in MDFA, one of our other companies, the market has been slightly down. And despite the fact when we deal with our clients, our financial services clients, and tell them, look, we're building a long-term strategy. This is about how much you keep, not how much you make. There will be years where the market is down. There will be years when the market is up. We have investment and tax strategies that are going to really pay off for you, in particular when you move to a point where you're earning less than you are now. Because it's not what you make that counts, it's what you keep that counts. And despite that, you can imagine we have a large percentage of, oh, you know, portfolio management, and I'm down this year. And, you know, they're down like 2%. But the point is that the culture today in the communications era has brought about this whole issue of instant gratification. Now, why is this important for you to keep in mind? Because instant gratification means you can't just keep on keeping on. The minute they find some way of getting more satisfied in another place, you become suspect. And it's happening internationally. There's no question about that. But it's very important to keep in mind that if you don't think it's happening to you right now, which it probably is, but it definitely will be. So it's imperative to understand we are in an era of instant gratification, and there's just no other way around it. So this kind of what is the point here? We have to move past traditional services. Those of you that have been in on some of my other presentations, you know I've said repeatedly that simply trying to stick to compliance, tax, audit, and so on, they're getting commoditized. The larger companies are moving towards providing those services into the smaller company markets. And you have to. I know let me give a good example. In Australia, Deloitte has hired someone who went to an Ivy in their undergraduate work and an MBA, who built a business as part of their MBA project, who came out of it, launched another business and sold it, then went to work in the States for a major consultancy organization, didn't like it, moved back to Australia, and shortly became the head of Australia's National Association of Consulting Services. In other words, it's the association for consultants there. And Deloitte hired them less than a year ago to basically craft from whole cloth an entire set of services for SME businesses in Australia. That should be quite a statement. I understand from other sources that at this very moment in the United States, senior partners in Deloitte are interviewing some people who are regarded as futurists, technology and business services futurists, to bring on board to help guide them towards their next directions. You've heard me talk about KPMG and their activity in the UK and how they're moving towards services to the SME marketplace. And Pricewaterhouse is doing it in Australia. Pricewaterhouse is doing it in the UK. These are things that are beginning to happen, and the big guys are coming in. They recognize this is where the next step is. So we have to move beyond traditional services, because even though the big four maybe don't know how to provide those services effectively to smaller businesses, let's face it, their overhead and burden is very, very high, but they're creating whole profit centers and capitalizing them to get it done and make it happen and learn how to make it happen. They will learn. Do they know how to do it as well as I do? Probably not, but that's not the point. Deep pockets and drive towards future is going to cause them to do it. So when you move beyond traditional services, one of the real keys is, how do you initially gain trust? Okay? What do you really talk about first? What do you talk about next? How do you define the relationship? I won't say who and I won't say where, but one of the major accounting firms asked me if I would come in to help train the frontline support people that were providing like basic services. They were doing accounting and bookkeeping and reporting and KPI stuff and so on. Would I help train them? So on this trip, there were over 40-some people there. And so I just opened up and said, so, you know, what questions do you have? Where are you going? Now, the average length of employment, despite this being a very, very big firm, was very short. Let's say everyone there was employed less than 9 months. And the vast majority of them were employed less than 6 months. So it isn't like they were long-termers in this large accountancy firm. And, you know, they said, we don't even know how to get the relationship going. What do we do? So I spent 2.5, 3 hours with each. They split the teams in two because they still had to give coverage. But for 2.5 hours with each group, I literally walked through giving them scripting. What do you talk about first? What do you talk about next? How do you define the relationship? And obviously, I'm not going to take 2 hours on this presentation to say exactly what I told them. But in order to gain trust, you really have to show an interest in the principle of the company. So do you talk about their personal lives? No. Do you first talk about their relationship with you? No. Do you ask them what they're expecting from you? No. Do you tell them what you're going to provide? No. The first thing you talk about is you take an interest in their business. You say, Frank, you know, this is Peter here. I'm very excited because I name my firm has asked me to kind of be your first touch point on what we're hoping to do to help your business prosper, but I just need to find out a little bit more. I see the business has been in place in 8 years. For 8 years, have you been the principal owner that whole time? Oh, really? Well, tell me more. Wow. What were some of the challenges you faced? You know, a lot of startup businesses go through, did you go through that? How did you face it? Oh my goodness. Okay, so I'm letting them tell me about the history of the company because it really is all about them. In order to gain trust, I have to make them feel like I made them feel like the most important person in the world. And frankly, how am I going to provide advice if I don't know something about the history of the company? Now, you might already know these things, but maybe you've never talked with them about it. You know, Charlie, you know, we've been doing your accounting work since 2008, and I'm very grateful, but I owe you an apology. I really haven't spent the time trying to find out more about what goes on in the day-to-day. Like in 2009, I know this was tough. We talked with you about capital and cash management, but tell me, what was it like on a day-to-day? What were you going through? I knew you had to. How did that feel? Were there any repercussions from that? They need someone to share the things they've been through. Hey, I see, last year you broke through 3 million in top line. How'd that feel? What did it mean to you? You have to really gain trust by letting them talk about themselves and their company. Their company is their baby. So then what do you talk about next? Usually the next thing I want to talk about is where are you anticipating the company being? What do you see in the next year? What do you see in the next 3 years? You're going to die with your boots on? Tell me what you have in mind. What would you like in your position in the company? These are very simple questions, but they're really critical to gain trust. Have I said anything about me? No. Have I said anything about what I'm going to do for them? No. Have I said anything about our services? No. I only gain trust by talking about them next. And trust me, if I'm being brought in to assist really large accounting firms get their baseline people understanding how to do this, this is coming at you. It's absolutely coming at you. So it's imperative that you gain trust through these very basic approaches. Then finally, how do you define the relationship? In other words, what you have to say is, look, Vessenes, Schwartzbein, and Fredrickson here, we really feel that it's imperative that we do a better job of helping our mid-sized businesses. And so what we've tried to do is take a better look at what's involved in financial management. I know you guys, you don't understand what key performance indicators are, but those kind of ratios make a huge difference. They make a difference in terms of the ability to generate lending, capital. We have to be able to take a look at what types of things are relevant for you to understand. Are there ways we can show you what is your real cash on hand? What is your true break even? Little things that I think will not only help you sleep better, but help build more financial security in the company. We can't do this without you, but that's what we're going to try and do. So I've defined the relationship. It's all about them. It's about the benefits to them. I've talked about a couple of the services and features that we want to be able to offer, and I won't be able to do that until I've gained the trust by talking about these things. Now, as soon as I define the relationship, you don't go in for the kill. You do not move ahead and say, so when can we start? You say, look, I just wanted to chat this time. We've kind of covered what I had hoped to talk about. Any questions for me? What concerns do you have? What can I do to make us really much more valuable to you? It's always about them and what they feel they need. And then the last thing you always do, is you close for the next meeting. Great, I'd like to touch base with you again in whatever that time period is, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. You have to do that because you will never be able to move beyond traditional services unless you gain their trust. Your existing services are inflicted upon them by tax and regulatory law. Additional services come as a result of trust between you and the client. So how do you do this? You know, a lot of this is messaging. What are you really saying? I find political campaigns really fascinating because I don't think any of the candidates really understand how to message. They say things that they sincerely mean, but they're not really addressing the underlying issues. I watched a candidate who did something, a conservative candidate, who did something revolving around Obamacare. And the interviewer asked him, so why did you do this with Obamacare? And instead of making their fundamental statement that they believed that healthcare absolutely needed reform 10 years ago, 12 years ago, the kind of reform that came out of Obamacare was not something the vast majority of the American population wanted, that the Democratic Party shoved it down everyone's throats through political tricks in the Congress. So there's no question we need a reform. But the reason I did this was that's what they should have said, so that people could understand underlying what they believed and why they made the decision they did. That's messaging. And it's so fascinating for me to watch how crippled most political candidates are, especially in national relations and national elections, on packaging their messaging. So you have to really understand what is it you're saying. You know, what is your vocabulary? I've talked a lot about this. Accountancy and financial management has all kinds of things in vocabulary. About a year ago, I did a presentation on balance sheet forecasting. We had like 140 people sign up for that one. And I basically talked about what it was and why it's required and how it's been changed in regulatory laws from the banks in the United States and so on and so forth. Well, when we went to Australia, I found out that they didn't know what balance sheet forecasting was. They called it three-way forecasting. Okay, what was I to know? New language, we integrated it into Prophecy's accounting software, wonderful. When we went to the UK, I didn't understand three-way forecasting, and they didn't understand balance sheet forecasting. Their phrase was forecasting. And registered chartered accountants in the UK understood that what we call balance sheet forecasting is how they do forecasting. So, you know, the industry is every industry has its kind of unique sets of vocabulary. We have our own sets of vocabulary, but it's imperative that we don't confuse who we're talking to by our vocabulary. So anytime there's a phrase like what is truly a key performance indicator, and short, KPI, what is one? Well, what do they mean? You know, what does my debt to equity ratio really mean? Why is that important? Why is it important to a bank? Why should it be important to me? These are things that we have to educate them by, or we'll never move beyond providing traditional services. I think the next thing that's most important is things that seem simple to us don't seem simple to our clients. We have to be really patient in educating them. Patience in helping them understand is really the key towards creating a future for them. Now, how long does it take? Well, you have to establish credibility. There's the trust factor first. Credibility is, yes, you're viable. Trust is, it's worth listening to you. And then we have to build towards having expectations. What expectations would they have from us? I think one of the most astonishing things that happened while I was in the UK was while we were there, a very, very large bank in the UK was working with one of the big four accounting firms. And they called me in because they were on this project where they wanted to create reporting and KPIs and benchmarking and ways of responding to their SME clients. And it was a 9-week project. It was a team of like 10 people from the bank and 2 people from one of the big 4. And they hauled us in the 7th week. And why? Well, we found out when we got there, I literally on a Wednesday morning, I spent 4.5 hours with them. On a Thursday morning, we spent 4.5 hours with them. We found out that they had a developer tool from the EU that they were anticipating using, and it wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to work, so word got around, and these people in the Big 4 knew who we were. So since I was there, I was asked to come in. So we went in, and I'm listening to what they were doing, and I thought, oh my goodness, you're going to do what? Well, basically what the bank wanted to do was create this tool that the software developer, whether it was us or whoever it was somehow going to install it, teach their businesses, the business clients, what these things meant, and that the business owner would then invite the bank in to be able to look at the financials with them so that it would streamline and make more efficient the ability for the bank to give them loans. Well, does that sound silly to you? By the time you teach a business owner how to build a better financial statement, and they're frustrated with their bank because it's impossible to get a loan, by the time they do that, the first thing they're doing is going bank shopping. They're not turning over their financials to the bank. But the accounting firm had kind of helped them build this, and so the next day, because there were a lot of technical issues on this, we brought in some of our team, our chief technology officer, our head of development, our head of global support, just a number of people, and we had another 4-hour session with them to talk about this. And then I wrote a response back just to the accounting firm, and I said, look, what they're asking us to do, we can do. However, the cost of us installing, setting up, and training this to every single individual license, we're probably one of the few development companies in the world that could do it, but you do understand the expense of that would never be reached by earnings the bank would make on loans. It just won't happen. I said, but you asked us for a presentation, so we're going to put together a little workflow of how we do the software and present that. However, it would be better if the bank themselves were the administrator of the software, invited their clients to come into it, help them understand what the key performance indicators are, and help them or help their other professional service providers like the accounting firms learn how to increase their financial picture and therefore make it easier to get loans. So I thought this was really interesting because they had a deadline. It was 2 weeks from then, and could we do it? And well, we could have done in 3 weeks, but not in 2 weeks, and so we sent the proposal back. Didn't hear anything from them on the weekend. By Tuesday, I sent an email to the accounting firm, and I said, guys, I know this is a huge thing, and I can't even imagine all the challenges in this, but I just wanted to make sure you got our blah, 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 blah. Well, about an hour and a half later, I get an email back saying, really appreciate your reports and how you've managed this, and we're taking it back to corporate with a complete rethink as to how we're going about this project. So I didn't think anything about this. I thought, okay, I saved the accountant's fanny, and we created an expectation of simplifying how the SMEs got capital. Okay, seemed pretty straightforward. But the next day, I got invited to a thing that's held by Santander Bank called, I think it was called Red Top. And it's kind of like a traveling carnival for SMEs. They had been to 17 cities in the UK where they set up in a public park, and they do have a red tent, but it's made of fiberglass. And when I went out there were like 40 SMEs that were there, and they're mingling with all these people from Santander. And then we went inside to the tent, this fiberglass tent that held about 50 people in it, because there were 4 SME business owners that had worked with Santander. There was a representative from a Big 4 accounting firm that had helped them. There was a bank loan officer. There was an alternative lending source and an alternative credit group, along with people from Santander. And basically, they were talking about how all the team, the bank, the accounting firm, the lenders, and the non-traditional lenders and the people that did leasing of equipment worked together to help these SMEs have astonishing viability. And it wasn't like they had become, businesses doing 100 million a year. Some of these were doing 2-3 million pounds a year, but they had become incredibly profitable from startup and scratch. And I was impressed. If I was launching a bank instead of accounting software, that's how I would have done it. So from there, I was invited to meet the head of SME services at Santander, who have only been there 5 or 6 years, but have captured an 8% market share. Think of that, 8% in 5 years of all the banking in the UK, and they're forecast to hit 11.5 to 12% next year. Here's what I found out. The British government has mandated that if a bank rejects a loan from a business, they must provide an alternative lending source that would be viable for that business client. Now, think about this. You're a bank. You have a bunch of SME clients. They're coming to you because they need capital, and you're going to turn them down. But when you turn them down, you have to introduce them to another lending source required by law. Now, think of that. It's not like how the banks blew up here in 08 and 09, where you went to a bank and whether you had any viability or credibility, you could lie about your job, you could lie about your wages, and the bank was forced to give you money. Otherwise, there'd be a class action suit or whatever, and that's why the banks sold it as fast as they could to Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, who lied through their teeth, along with some of the, the big holding company banks, and sold it as AAA bonds into the global market. It blew up. Of course it blew up. They weren't viable loans. But the UK government wasn't saying, we're forcing you to make bad loans. We're saying that we know that the survival of SMEs in our country, which represent over 99% of the businesses in the United Kingdom, require capital. So if you, Mr. Bank, cannot provide that service, you have to route them to someplace that can. How would you like to be in the banker's shoes, knowing that if you reject a loan, you've got to give your client away? No wonder the large bank came to us. And yeah, I'm back talking to the CEO of Santander on my next trip in 3 weeks over to the UK, because I think we're going to be able to help them with that. But do you understand how this is moving beyond traditional services? And trust me, if this works in the UK, I will say this, governments, banks, and financial services people, they glom on. If there's something that's working, you will see trends in making this happen in other places. Does the bank really know how to create value-added proposition in terms of improving financial stability in a company? I don't know. But I got to believe that accountants are and will, because there's no question the Big Four are moving towards doing it. So in order to do this, you absolutely have to establish understanding between you and your client before you give advice. I realize most people in accounting, they're not really patient. They want to get locked into the cube and they want to do their work, and that's okay. We're not populated by socially extroverted, chatty people. I get it. There's exceptions, obviously, but there's a tendency to just want to give advice or not to give advice because you're worried about fiduciary responsibilities. There has to be a deep level of understanding before you can give advice. And so this is why, if you're seeing something, you don't tell someone what's going on. You say, here's what I'm noticing. Your debt to earnings ratio is too high. And it's not that it didn't have to happen in 09, I understand. But this ratio has only dropped about 5% in the last 6 years. So yet I've seen there's this growth and so on. Tell me what's been going on. And then whatever they say, what you want to do is repeat back to them what they said. If you ask a question and you repeat back what your client has told you, two things happen. The first is they believe that you heard them and understood them. Now that might seem very fundamental, but trust me, unless you repeat back what someone says, they don't really believe that you heard and understood. And then there's a second thing that happens. It's a subliminal piece. And that is they think you agreed with them. Okay, now, could be that you agreed with them. Could be you don't agree with them. But if you don't agree with them, it's really important that you say, you know, I understand how you come to that conclusion, but, and you ask the next question. You know, the thing that raises in my mind is, how do you deal with that? And basically, I just keep repeating this process over and over and over because I want to guide them into the right solution. I don't want it to come from me. If it comes from me, then I've established a fiduciary responsibility. We don't want to do that. And frankly, most business owners don't want to be told what to do. What I want to do is I want to make sure I understand what they think about and why their cash flow projections keep growing, but their expenses are growing at the same or greater rate, so there's no additional margin. Why is that happening? Now look at this. Tell me, you know, was this, okay, but this was an established product and, oh, okay, so it happened because, okay, so tell me, what did you think about how to manage that? Oh, so do you understand what I'm saying? It's really imperative that you go through these questions, you repeat it, you ask the next logical question, and you keep doing this, even if it takes 10, 12, 15 questions for them to discover what you knew the answer was right at the beginning. If you just tell them the answer, you've done a lot of bad stuff. If they recognize what you're saying is true, you made them feel dumb. If they don't understand what you said, they thought you didn't listen to them and you didn't hear what they said and you didn't understand them. And you basically have crushed any credibility in their logic and conclusions that they drew. Those are terrible things to do in creating a relationship for services. You have to learn how to ask the questions, repeat what's said, ask the next question, repeat what's said, and work it on down until they come to a conclusion. When they finally get to the solution, then you just affirm it and you say, you know, I couldn't agree with you more. Just as we walked through, I was thinking the same thing. Way to go, Frank. You have to affirm to them that they figured it out. And if they say, you probably knew that earlier on, I would say, well, I might have a minute or two, you know, before you, but you know, I'm just asking you the questions that are running through my head. You came to the same conclusions. That's great. Way to go, Frank. It's really imperative that you establish understanding before advice. I really don't want to give them advice. I want them to discover what they should be doing. That's how we provide advice. So the key here is that providing advice is the equivalent of having conversations. And they're their conclusions, not yours. I never want to make it my conclusion. I never want to go into Prophecy's CFO software tool and build a forecast on 4 scenarios and put in the value sets and say, see, this is the way out. I'm liable. They follow my advice? No. I say, this is how we can build a forecast. This is how we can create a scenario. Oh, that's it. Wouldn't we have to hire? What about leasing facilities? How about, and what is this going to do for support? Is there tech costs? And yeah, oh, good, okay, yeah, this is how we work it in. And again, that's what we built the tools to do, to help be proactive in future fiscal management. But whether you use a tool like ours or you have some other way of doing it, the key here is that it's their conclusions, not yours. And then here is the next, literally most important thing you have to do, is document the conversation. Frank, just wanted to send you an email. So enjoyed our visit. I want to make sure I understood what we talked about. You shared that, and this is how we were going to improve the debt to equity ratio, and this is what we were going to do for improving the margin on cash flow, and this is how we're going to look at the next steps that you're doing. And you know, you basically shared that. Great, so much fun to work with you, really appreciate it. I'm documenting the conversation and I'm putting it internally into our databases. and then I'm sending a digital follow-up. I'm absolutely sending them information, so there's a trail of what went on. This is how I remain in compliance. And, you know, a lot of times when I would do these things, I do the first one, and clients would say, is it okay with you if I record this? I literally had clients that would show up in the old days with little, you know, digital recording devices, and their audio is recording the advice. And then they're burning it onto a CD and putting it in their car. It's just, I'm not sure what you'll face. I mean, nowadays we have other ways of doing, digital recordings. You can do it on your phone. But it's really valuable. You could say, listen, I just want to record the event, because a lot of times we get these epiphanies and inspirations, and I want to make sure we can always come back to them. Is that all right? Okay. Then the last thing I always do is I write handwritten thank you notes, literally handwritten thank you notes. It's really hard to believe how powerful a handwritten thank you note is. When I was flying over to Australia, and this was a couple months ago, I happened to be seated next to someone who was the chief technology support systems for Dassault Airlines. Now, Dassault are the ones that make the Mirage fighter jets, but they're also the ones that make Falcon private jets. They're really cool private jets. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a Falcon, but it's kind of like the only Falcon, their private jets, I can, on the more modestly priced ones, I can actually stand up in without bumping my head, and I'm 6 foot tall. So, we're just chit-chatting about this stuff, and so I so enjoyed it, but we were flying on Virgin Australia, and obviously this guy lives in Australia, so he's all over the world for Dassault. And after we got on, the flight wasn't too full. The head flight attendant came up to him and said, Robert, I see you're on the flight. Yes, they said, in a minute we're going to close the door. When that happens, like row 6 is completely empty. It's like the center section of the flight. You can go take a nap there. And they literally laid out a blanket for him to lay down on the trip. So we had this really fun chat about what he does and where it's going and how the private aircraft work and the things that we had learned about how to fund and finance private aircraft. And I sent him a thank you note. Yesterday, now remember, this is 2 months ago, yesterday, I got an email back from him telling me how touched he was by the thank you note, and it was a rare occasion for him to be traveling as much as he did and meet somebody like me. What's the long-term effect of that? I mean, for me, it's just, wow, it's a shrinking planet. But something as simple as a little thank you note makes a huge difference. Now, if I'm chatting with them every month, I'm not going to send a thank you note every month, but I will after the first conversation. I will after we do some quarterly summary or big decision. Certainly I will anytime I would meet with others on their team, right? And I will send a bunch of thank you notes out. I mean, I literally have gotten privately embossed thank you notes that are just squares. They don't open. They're just a square with my name at the top, and I write the note to them. I personalize it. When I had written the book, The Golden Rules of Economics, The Real Way Out of America's Financial Crisis 4 years ago, I was on a book speaking tour with a number of other authors. And I remember being in Columbus, Ohio, and they had each of the authors stand up and speak. There were about 300 people in the audience. And I was very grateful. I got a standing O at the end of it. There are other really well-known writers there. They didn't get the standing O's. But afterwards, they let us set up little book tents. And what was very interesting was the other writers sold 10, 15 books. We sold 243 of them. And I personally signed every one on the dedication page with something that I thought was relevant to the individual. What's the impact of that? There's really something about personalizing communications and relationships with people. Just imperative. So you have to understand that you have professional value. All businesses need this kind of advice. Even major multinationals need this kind of advice. Now, I'm not saying you're going to supplant Ernst & Young going into a Fortune 50 to give this kind of advice. Maybe you are Ernst & Young, okay? But the point here is that all businesses really do need this kind of advice. And owners really don't have anyone to talk to. You've heard me say this before. They can't talk to their employees. If they're doing well, they'll wonder why they're not getting raises. If they're doing poorly, the most valuable will start looking for other jobs. They don't talk to their significant others. Maybe they do, but they don't really want to get too granular. It's like, we're having a good year, sweetheart. That's about it. They really don't have anyone to talk to. They don't talk to other business owners. They trust you to talk to you. Now, the question then is that how do we get to the value of the advice? Those of you that have been listening to me for the last couple of years, I absolutely believe that the only way you do the value of the advice is with a monthly retainer, because it's a perception of value. It's not by project. It's not by hour. The advice is the significance of what happens through the relationship. We had an accounting firm that was using our software that asked us to build in a valuation tool, which we added to our CFO and our franchise and our enterprise software. And the reason they told us they did this is every quarter they would run the analytics to show the valuation of the company. Because essentially what they want to do is say, look, you've been working with us, and I know we've cost you, this much, but look at this. The value of the company has grown by. That was a value-added proposition that the owner could understand. All businesses really need your advice. Now, there's another part of this, I think, and that is, where do referrals come from? You might say, well, we're at capacity. Well, you might be at capacity, but traditional services are getting commoditized, which means your revenue stream is either going to be static or shrinking, or you're going to be losing clients. You have to find ways of getting referrals. When we started our financial services practice to physicians and doctors, we started from ground zero, scratch. Fortunately, Catherine, my wife, is absolutely magical at rainmaking, and the first year she generated 72 new clients. That's pretty incredible. A lot of financial advisory practices would be thrilled with 10. We generated 72. And now, we're in our fourth year, and there are hundreds of physicians and physician families that we work with, hundreds. But over 70% of what we do is a result of referrals. So I'd like to tell you what our secret of how to get referrals is. There is no magic method. I can tell you flat out, there is no magic method for getting referrals. The answer is in how long does it take? It takes a long time. Well, how does it really happen? Here's how it happens. We're talking to people about their money, right? We're talking about their money, and we're talking about their protection and safety in a very dangerous world. So how long does it take to really gain the trust of talking to someone in their money? Now, accountants have a built-in advantage because you deal with their money all the time. But to really talk about it in detail and for you to ask them questions that helps them discover they really didn't know what they were doing without you telling them that, and them, managing them through feeling stupid, that's an artwork. But I do know that even when we're working with very, very bright people like doctors, it can take 6 months to a year just for their trust level to take place. And we do it by the frequency of communication. It's all about them. We are very, very patient in educating them. It takes a lot of time. So how does it happen? It happens because through the patience of the communication and the follow-up and sending the emails and writing the private notes, eventually they begin to feel safe in the relationship. And when that happens, it lasts for a long, long time. Why does it last for a long time? the trust level is so high about something that's so critical that they didn't have anyone else to talk to, that by the time the trust level has hit this point, whether it's a year or a year and a half, for some it might take 2 years. That's okay. You're relieving a pain, an anxiety that they've had the entire time they've run the company. It might not be a conscious pain, it's probably a subliminal pain, but it is a very, very critical element. How long does it last for? It should last a lifetime. As long as the services you are providing are very easy to understand, they're measurable, they know that they have an open ticket to call you, to connect with you. These are lifetime relationships. The turnaround company that I launched in the 80s, Investment Advisors, when we shifted towards going specifically after estate and financial and trust and contractual matters for physicians and surgeons, that was in I think 2010. And then the software company started up in I think it was like September or August of 2008. When we did that, we didn't want to kill Investment Advisors, the consulting work. We just thought, we'll let it die on the vine. It's just, we have to shift what we're doing. We're going to let it die on the vine. So we didn't update the website. We didn't go out and do a ton of speaking. We just didn't. We thought, eventually it'll drift away and we can close it all down. But the credibility of the relationships we had built since the late 80s was so large that every year something pops up that absolutely needs our help. They're the most precious, sweet people. They were referred by someone, and there's this other piece that just, it's like you throw the cat out, but the cat keeps coming back. The trust that comes from referrals lasts a lifetime. So, in summary, building relationships with clients is critically important because, first of all, from the day we live in today, they expect much more communications. Secondly, it allows you to move beyond traditional services. Thirdly, it will provide you more business and business opportunities from referrals. At any rate, it's a brave new world. It's upon us. I hope you can take some of the things we've said today and build an absolutely amazing, fantastic future for your practice. And I think I'm scheduled next month for a follow-up to this. So thanks, everyone. And I am going to turn it back to our hostess here.
Thank you, Peter, for sharing with us today. I'm going to go ahead and take this on here. So I'm sure some of you have questions. I'm going to go ahead and give you a quick demo on how to hop onto our iShade.com Ask the Expert session. Hide some of this. Okay. So you're going to log on to iShade.com, and I see we had a couple of Hey, I can hear him in there. I do see I have some questions in here.
Oh, that's quite all right. You can turn.
So you're going to log on. Hey, Peter, are you still there?
I am, yes. I just had someone who works in my office come by to start.
Oh.
Here.
Okay.
They're normally here on Tuesdays, but they got delayed till today. So.
Cool. Okay. So anybody who wants to ask questions or anything like that, you can log on to iShade.com. You're going to click on the Ask the Expert tab. And then from here, you'll see the listing. So you'll click on Join Now. And down here at the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see Ask a Question. And here you can type in anything, and Peter will answer your questions over here in a chat window. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today, and you can check back on our Ask the Expert session for future webinars. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, everyone.